Hello, bonsoir, and welcome to the Get French Football News Show. I'm Nathan Staples, and joining me this evening are Peter Rutzler and Jeremy Smith. March Madness begins this week, but it seems that it's already hit the world of football this week, and unfortunately, France has all been too willing to join in. But more on that and the weekend's action after the latest headlines. Monaco maintained their iron grip on second place after winning 3-1 away from home against Strasbourg on Friday night. Stefan Jovetic, Ronnie Lopez and Fabinho all struck to sink the Alsace side, who now just sit 3 points above the automatic relegation places. Saturday's early kickoff saw Paris Saint-Germain blow off some steam post-Champions League exit as they thumped bottom side Metz 5-0. Youngster Christopher Nkunku stole the show with 2 goals and almost had a third, while Timothy Weah also made another cameo with 20 minutes off the bench. In the multiplex, Lille let a goal lead slip against Montpellier to draw 1-1, leaving them in the relegation places. Fans then stormed the pitch at full time, attempting to kick and punch some of their own players and chanted, "If we go down, we are coming for you," at club owner Gerard Lopez. Elsewhere, Nantes left it late to win for the first time in 5 games as top scorer Emiliano Sala scored to beat Troyes, as Angers made it 7 points from a possible 9 with a goalless draw against Bordeaux. 2 1-1 draws populated the rest of Saturday's matches as Dijon dropped points at home for only the second time in 10 games against Amiens, while Rennes scored 4 minutes from time to deny Saint-Etienne in that draw. On Sunday, an Alassane player quadruple helped Nice to a 5-2 win against Guingamp. The home side have now just 1 win in their last 10 games in all competitions, while elsewhere, as Lyon finally got out of their slump of 6 games without a win by beating a cagey Caen side 1-0. In the final game of the weekend, Marseille proved too much in the end for Toulouse as they ran out 2-1 winners. Kostas Mitroglou scored the winner just seconds after coming on in the second half, maintaining OM's 5-point gap over Lyon, who they take on next Sunday. And that's all for the news. But for all your latest in the world of French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballnewsfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this week up north, where Lille ended up drawing this weekend against Montpellier, but that's not the real story in this one. Fans stormed the pitch at full time and attempted to assault several of the players, who were quickly ushered off, thankfully, and they proceeded to chant at their owner, Gerard Lopez, because of the struggles that they've been having this season. Peter, it's getting really ugly now, isn't it?
It is. Reflections of West Ham over here as well, but this was a little bit more extreme, even though they had more stewards. And yeah, you're right, it is getting a bit ugly, and it's quite surprising in a way that it manifested in the way that it did. I mean, that's not to say that this hasn't been bubbling away for some time. The financial difficulties that Lille are in are well documented, and we've talked about them on the pod. And of course, they've got their suspended relegation hanging over them as well. But yeah, it all bubbled over, obviously. And if you didn't see it, it was the end of the game against Montpellier. It was 1-1. The game, Lille had led in the game. They were pegged back by a Roussillon goal. And I mean, a draw against Montpellier isn't exactly something that you sniff at. Montpellier are pushing for Europe, which surprised many people. They're a very difficult side to beat. All of the big sides have struggled against them this season. But, you know, at full time, fans streamed onto the field. It was not very pretty scenes at all. Players being hit. Thiago Maia, I think, said afterwards that one fan went to kick him, but it was blocked by a steward. And then, of course, it was all directed at Gerard Lopez. But, you know, it's a culmination of a season of broken promises, which chimes a lot with what's happened at West Ham as well. Of course, with Lille, it was Gerard Lopez coming in and saying, Champions League football, I want to get Lille back to the top table of French football and then back into Europe's elite competition. it hasn't worked out like that. Not helped by El Loco, of course. I mean, they spent heavily last summer. Brought in a number of young players trying to replicate the Monaco model of buy young, cheaper players. I mean, Lille, cheaper relatively compared to the major prices that are paid by Paris Saint-Germain, but compared to the rest of the league, a lot more than that. And then sell on for more. That's the model, but it just hasn't worked out like that at all. And Gerard Lopez's financial issues, of course, his money is not his; it's borrowed. It's almost like it's a hedged sort of bet with how he's anticipating his player assets to be resold, and form is falling off a cliff. And they're second bottom, and you can understand why the fans are frustrated. Of course, you can understand that, and fans have every right to protest. But when you're invading the field like they did, when you're attacking your own players, it's just the major issue with it is that it doesn't really solve anything. The only thing it does is it will probably get a stadium ban. It will cause the Lille players, most of these are young players. I think that's what Benzia pointed out after the game. They're going to be affected by this. It's not exactly a positive environment to play. You lose the home advantage, it becomes a complete opposite. It's a whole new level of pressure. It can only have a negative effect on the team. And whilst every fan has a right to protest, they pay their money and all of that. So, but at the end of the day, when you protest in like this, when you cross the line and go onto the field, it's just detrimental for your side's fortunes. And unfortunately, that's what happened on Saturday.
Absolutely. And whether it's a right way, wrong way, or only way, really, Jez, of going about this. I mean, we've, as I briefly mentioned in the intro, really, we've seen a few of these strange incidents over the weekend. Obviously, there was the one at West Ham that caught a lot of attention, but obviously didn't lead to violence, at least anyway, like we saw in France, and the even stranger one really in Greece with the owner of the club coming on the field with a gun, and he suspended the entire league because of it, the government. So at least it's not got that badly. But in this specific isolated case, obviously we we have to condemn the violence that the fans have done, but have they got a right to be angry at the owners and want to protest against them? Obviously, this is not the right way to go about it. But are they right in wanting to protest against this group that Gerard Lopez has brought in and what he's done with the club so far?
I think that there's definitely an argument for saying they've got a right to be annoyed. I mean, I think when he came in, this is the same sort of consortium that came close to buying Marseille and putting Bielsa back in charge there, and that fell through. And suddenly, within sort of weeks or months or whatever, that they're buying Lille, and that, to me, that sort of smacked a little bit of sort of bad signs. That, I'm not saying all these owners buy any of these clubs through love of the club particularly, but someone who's sort of willing to go, oh yeah, that one didn't work out, so here's another club for me. It does seem that it's not really about any kind of love of the project, for want of a better word. It's just about I don't know, money and ego trips and that kind of thing. So I think there were warning signs right from the start. And certainly the Bielsa experiment went very badly wrong. And depending on whether you're sort of one of Bielsa's rose-tinted disciples or not, you're going to blame him or people higher up. It was interesting that Seydou, the former Lille president, sort of very, very much said that it's all Bielsa's fault. Even if it is, you have to blame those above him for giving him free rein to do whatever he wanted. But the bottom line is that that's certainly not the way to deal with it. And I'm absolutely not condoning what the West Ham fans did, but at least apart from one or two exceptions, they sort of surrounded the director's box in the stands and made it clear who their sort of anger was directed at. Whereas, in the Lille, again, for better or worse, because of the way Bielsa went about it, as Peter said, that trying to follow the Monaco model, it's a squad of very, very young players, and they're not having a great season. Of course they're not. but they're still only 1 point from safety. And to direct it all at the players, to frighten them. I mean, experienced players. You look at how Mark Noble for West Ham was freaked out by one fan invading the pitch the other day. For a few kids basically to be attacked actually physically in some cases by several hundred fans is ridiculous. They're going to be spooked now. You'd assume they're going to be spooked for if not the rest of the season, certainly the next couple of matches. They're probably, are they really play? You want to think any footballer turning out is going to be playing for themselves, but also for the fans. Are they now going to want to be playing for these fans if that's the people that they're representing? And yeah, as Pete said, they're probably almost certainly going to be playing at least a couple, if not the remainder of their home matches behind closed doors, which obviously isn't going to help either. It was such a counterproductive thing to do. And Galtier gave an interesting interview and obviously not happy, but he said, what happens now? I'm going to go home now. I live in the centre of Lille. Are there going to be fans waiting for me at the door? When the players go home, are they going to have fans waiting for them at the door? So, it's not even something that they can sort of switch off and say, oh, this is what happened yesterday. I'll go home. I'll forget about it. That fans do get to know where players live. If these fans are so angry that they're prepared to do what they did yesterday, who knows what they can do? It's not a good situation to be in at all. And Gautier also sort of implied when asked that there were hints that something like this could happen. So the trouble had been rumbling for a while. So clearly it's a major issue that's affecting all areas of the club. But to let it affect the players or to let it risk affecting the players to that extent is absolute madness. And it's always a cliche when there's any kind of hooliganism or anything like that. It's a minority; they don't represent the majority. It doesn't matter. I mean, there's enough of them there to make it a really big issue. I'm sure they're not all sort of mercenaries who are there just for the fun of a punch up or whatever. I'm sure they are genuine Lille fans, but they've got a very funny way of showing it.
Yeah, that's not necessarily what I would describe a fan anymore, really. It's crossing a border, isn't it? I know there's always sort of a weird cultism, you might say, about football, but a lot of fans have crossed the line, really, in that game, especially, and also obviously elsewhere. But kicking and punching the players, I mean, it's unforgivable, really. Those poor lads, a lot of them. And that's the worry that I wanted to mention, really, Peter, is that a lot of these players, part of this project, are very young, growing players that this might not just affect them for the rest of the season and their fight against relegation, which might be a misnomer anyway because of the issues with the DNCG that might rear their ugly head at the end of the season. But this is going to dramatically affect the rest of their season, isn't it? It's like Jeremy said, it's not just them thinking about it on the pitch, but now off the pitch as well.
Yeah, I think Jeremy put it quite eloquently. These players are going to be spooked by what's happened, and as Jez was saying, it goes beyond just what happens on the field in front of stands full of fans, whether there even be stands full of fans now for Lille at home for the rest of the campaign. But at home, when you're training and training ground, that's not a conducive atmosphere for success, and it will be tough for Lille now. I mean, they are so close to safety. I mean, they're 3 points off 15th for one thing, and their form hasn't been that poor. I mean, since Galtier's come in, they've experienced a bounce. He's tried to make them solid, and I think part of the issue that Galtier faced when he came in was facing a squad that was already in a relative amount of turmoil from Bielsa's methods, which aren't exactly family friendly all the time. So trying to recover that, which was already sort of a sinking ship, and now you're obviously these issues which players clearly are aware of beforehand, but now it's been taken to a whole new level by supporters, is not going to be a positive influence for the rest of the season. And losing the home advantage is a big thing. They've got Monaco away next, I think. So there is potential for it to spiral, but it was such a counterproductive thing to do. I mean, even financially, I think it was in L'Équipe that were talk that there was a businessman who supposedly signed a deal with the club, a 20 million euro deal. But he was there and obviously was horrified by what he saw. So you get things like that. That's not exactly advertising the club in the right way when you've already got financial issues hanging over you. So there are so many ramifications from this. And I mean, the only real positive was that the stewards were able to at least defend defend as well as they could. I mean, when you're watching the images, you've got fans trying to force their way through towards the dressing room, which is it's shocking, really. And it's not going to be good news for them in their fight for survival. That said, I do think they've got players good enough to do it. It's just whether now mentally they're able to gather themselves again and keep themselves in the division.
Yeah, absolute credit to those stewards as well, that did an absolute stand-up job to try and rescue the players in what was really for them a horrifying situation of them trying to protect themselves against their own fans, trying to assort them. A credit to them and their work that they did on that one. But Jeremy, at the end of this year, we've mentioned the stigma this is probably going to throw at the players and the hammer blow it might be to their mental toughness, really, for the fight ahead. I mean, there's only 9 games left of the season. They are not far off safety. Obviously, a point will put them above Twine, put them in the relegation playoff at the moment. But this kind of thing could cripple them, couldn't it? And it could, in the end, if other teams start picking up points again, relegate them.
It could do. I mean, you look at their run-in, it's not the worst in the world. They got Monaco, Marseille, Bordeaux away, although Bordeaux's form's a bit up and down. All the other matches are winnable, and they end the season with Metz and Toulouse, which really winnable games. And as Pete said, they're not playing bad stuff under Galtier. The second half against Lyon, I thought they really were excellent, and not only in terms of what they showed on the pitch, but just to have the strength of character as a group of young players to come back from 2-0 down as well. So I definitely think the ability's there. That's what makes it all the more ridiculous what those fans are doing. It's not like it's not like they're Metz, basically, completely cut adrift. They're so in the fight, and at half time, I think yesterday that I suppose virtually they were not yesterday on Saturday. Sorry, they were virtually out of the relegation zone. It's that close, and it could easily change that quickly again. It only takes a couple of wins to climb right up the table. So I think that the fans overdid it, but it's sort of doubly, triply, quadruply punishing themselves, because you'd think that whereas the players may have thought, as Pete said, a decent point against a team that's tough to beat, and we go on to the next match or the next couple of matches with reasonable chances of getting some points and climbing up the table. Now it's set them back so far psychologically. I still think they should stay up, but after this, it wouldn't be surprising if any kind of form completely tailed off and they sort of not plummeted, because they're not going to go any further down, but they failed to climb out of it as a result.
And that's the real worry now, isn't it? I think that it almost feels like, even though there is a lot of points to play for and a lot of great chances for them, it just feels like that will be the blow that will either send them down or hold them back from getting completely out of danger, really. I mean, at the same time, there'll be a lot of questions that will happen in the summer in terms of finances and whether they'll stay up because of that means, and rightfully so. The fans should protest about that. They should have protested about that earlier and in the stands or at the end of the game. But there is no reason to be assaulting the players at all. The players put everything into that game. They were probably the better side in that match. It was a 1-1 draw in the end. I don't think they realised that, really, that Montpellier didn't end up scoring another goal. Yes, Mike Maignan had to make a few saves near the end, and Montpellier could have quite easily won it themselves as well at the end, but there should be no blame on those players or Christophe Galtier, who is galvanising that squad after a terrible start, and they are starting to play better and show more heart and trying to grind out results. And realistically, if this was next week, for example, and they've got a different game next week, obviously, and it's sort of game against Monaco, would they have done the protest if they'd drawn 1-1 against Monaco? I don't think they would have done. It makes a massive difference, really, and I think it's appalling. And against a good side in Montpellier as well, a good defensive side, they played really well. It's disgusting. And
also, there seems to be more of a culture in France of sort of clubs and fans being willing to meet, and delegations and fan representatives, and sometimes it goes a bit too far, like it occasionally does in Marseille when they've had some kind of crisis, and Rennes every year seem to have some kind of set to training grounds and stuff, but at least there is some kind of dialogue, whereas in England it definitely doesn't seem like there ever is with the Premier League clubs. They're sort of so remote from their fans, so it's not like there isn't generally a forum for fans to protest in a more productive, peaceful way.
They should.
It's quite interesting. Sorry to chip in. I think Lopez met with fan groups this week as well. I think that's what made it so surprising, is that he'd had some kind of meeting with supporters in the run up to this game last week, and then obviously within seconds it's just completely collapsed, and everything that was said obviously hasn't held stick if anything positive was said.
Yeah, it's a worrying time for the club, really, and you start to worry now. There's likely to possibly be a stadium closure. I think possibly even for the end of the season, depending on how hard the ban hammer comes from the league and officials. But we'll wait and see on that one, really. On to what was one of the interesting games of the weekend, and really two ships passing in the night, really, with one side going down and one going up, really. And starting with a positive, Peter, it was the game between Nice and Guingamp, and Nice ran out 5-2 winners, and because mainly of the scoring exploits of Alisson Player. It was a real excellent performance, and with them, obviously, a great stat that they've not won a game without Mario Balotelli. Now they have. A great time to show up, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, he really excelled in that central position up front, and it's completely changed his goal scoring record for the season from 6 to 10. And yeah, he was outstanding. He was clinical. I think he was helped, of course, by some questionable defending. I think it'd be a nice way of putting it from Guingamp, but he was superb. His second goal especially was excellent. The way he chests it down, skips past the defender, and then coolly slots it into the far corner. It was a real all-round performance from Player. And we haven't really seen much of that for Nice this season, and really since Balotelli has joined the club. Of course, Balotelli has become sort of the main man, and especially this season, we've seen him pushed out wide to the left. I think the last time Player scored a hat-trick was again in the absence of Balotelli. I think it was against Metz, actually, Jez. And again, that was him playing through the centre. And he seems to thrive there. I mean, his consistency. I think when you compare the two between Balotelli and Player, you can understand why Favre has backed Balotelli, because Balotelli has just been so good for Nice, and he has been an essential cog in keeping them afloat in what's been a completely all over the place sort of season. But then counterintuitively, you could just go, well, maybe that's part of the issue. They're being too rigid with Balotelli when they've got other options. But Player was outstanding. 4 really well taken goals. A huge confidence boost for him, and I think despite the defensive questions which we'll come on to with Guingamp, I think that for him it was a really, really polished performance.
Yeah, and a polished performance from Nice, who have been much better in the second half of the season, really, Jez. So they slowly crept up the table after that shocking start where they were really flirting with relegation within the first sort of 10-15 games. But now they are back up in 7th and 42 points. They're only a point off Nantes in 5th place. And with a good team, with players starting to grow in confidence, I thought Jean-Michel Seri was very good at the weekend. Obviously, Players starting to score, and having Balotelli, who is doing really well at the moment this season, at least scoring goals as well. They're starting to get a little bit stronger. They're gaining confidence. They have probably the best quality out of those teams facing for that spot. So it's a late run at it, but do they have a real shot at getting Europa League football again?
They do. They need to show consistency or hope that it's a sort of season of 4 quarters and they're onto a positive final quarter, because they kind of started terribly, then had a really good run around the turn of the year, and then in recent weeks their form's tailed off again a little bit. I mean, a couple of them are cup defeats, but the last few weeks haven't been so positive. And then back to in the last 2 matches, I mean, they beat Lille last week, and then this is a really positive result. It to an extent, I think it was pretty flattering. I mean, Lucien Favre made it really clear that that when they first equalised, it was completely against the run of play, that they were sort of being battered at the time, and arguably Guingamp opened the scoring with a penalty and probably should have had another penalty a minute later. And if it had been 2-0, that would have made it very different. And then even at the end, Guingamp came back to 3-2, and then a couple of late goals make it look like a real thrashing. So I don't think too much should be read into the score itself. But yeah, I do think that of the teams around that spot below the top 4, I think Nice should have the quality to take that position, if they want to. But then I guess you could say they've had that quality all year, and really they should be sort of quite comfortable in that position by now. But I think Favre is an excellent coach. I think possibly this weekend was a big sort of psychological boost in terms of realizing that they're not absolutely reliant on Balotelli for the goals. Lise Malou, I think, has been quietly excellent all season, but yes, Seri coming back to something approaching his best bodes well, with the 2 of them making lots of chances for the front 2 or 3. So things bode well. But as I said, they sort of boded well around the end of January as well, and then it went wrong for a few weeks. So I'm hoping for them that it will be a positive finish, and I think it should be.
Yeah, because I also feel like on the balance of everything and the qualities of what those teams have, you look at, really it's down to 4 teams, you would think now, unless Bordeaux or even Dijon went on a bit of a crazy run and the other 4 sort of slipped off. But Montpellier, Nice, Rennes and Nantes, you would say obviously Nice have the most resources, probably the best squad out of those 4 as well, really. You might think that after that maybe Rennes have spent a lot in the summer at least anyway, so they do have the financial backing as well, but do they have the squad to really compete on those levels? At least Nice have been in European competitions for the last couple of years, so are more used to it, have a bigger squad because of it, and they used a lot of their players and did do much better this season at least anyway, even though they did go out to Lokomotiv Moscow. So it does feel like, at least from a Ligue 1 point of view, in terms of those great coalition points to try and get a better Champions League place or something like that, they need someone like Nice possibly in there fighting for the Europa League rather than some of the other squads. But on to so we've not really mentioned a lot, it feels like, this season in Guingamp, who've sort of drifted between 3 different sections of forms, it feels, in those sort of quarters you mentioned earlier, Jez, where the first section was pretty dire, really. I think they only won 4 games in the sort of first 3 months of the season. They had a really good sort of December, early January period where I think they won 5 out of 6 as well. And then it's dipped again. They've only won 1 in their last 10 in all competitions now. But the positive thing for them really is there's a lot of teams below them that are just as bad and just as inconsistent.
Yeah, definitely. I think with Guingamp, I think with last season, of course, it was a case of 2 halves, and this season it's, as you were saying, it's thirds. I think the season's been quite stagnant, really. It's probably the best way to describe it. I mean, again, here in this display, I think we could easily draw alarm bells from the fact that they've gone to 5-2 down, as Jez was saying, which wasn't really reflective of the actual game itself. And again, against Angers last week when they lost 3-0, it was 1-0 until the 89th minute. So, the scorelines haven't reflected just as if Guingamp are in some kind of crisis, but I think in this game especially, we saw saw evident some of the issues that they've had. I think they were okay going forward. They've got some good options. We know that. The likes of Saliba, Grenchen, and when Benazet came back, he looked to be almost a missing key. Actually, really, I thought he was the sort of player they were looking for to provide some real creativity. But their form has been up and down. And I think against Nice, we saw one of the major issues, which was at the back, which is one of the things that have been so stable, especially under Comboire and then Gourvenec before him, in providing that platform for success. And that was Kerbrat and Sorbonne. But this season, they haven't had that axis, that duo as stable. They've been rotated. Kerbrat has been the one permanent fixture, but Eboa's come in from PSG. He's been in and out as well. And that sort of reflected the unsettled nature, not only of the defence, but also the rest of the side. I think Guingamp amongst one of the sides to change their lineup the most out of most of the clubs in Liga. And defensively, that's where they came unstuck. I mean, Kerbrat had a wretched game. In all 4 of the goals, you could probably point some form of blame on him. But then again, it's midfield which left him very much exposed. Compared to last season, what they've really lacked is that sort of that flair that they had. I mean, it was the counter-attacking football that we all really, really enjoyed about Guingamp, and they haven't really had that at all this season. And obviously, going back to the rotation, that's probably part of it. I mean, Saliba has done okay. He hasn't done poorly, but we haven't seen him get anywhere near the levels he achieved last season that linked him with so many moves that all collapsed on deadline days. But then, I mean, there's a number of young players in the squad. You look at the likes of Coco and Blah, and none of them have really pushed on. But I don't think it's just a case of them developing. I just don't think they've had the chance to develop. And I think going back to the rotation, it's just they've not been settled. Only 2 players have played every minute this season, and that's Kerbrat and Johnson. Brion's next. I think he's played a couple less, and then Luca Doe and Sorbonne are the only 2 to play more than 20 games. And when you're looking at that, you're looking at 3 or 4 players there, of which Sorbonne has been rotated anyway, and you're trying to create that stability that just hasn't really worked this season for them. I wouldn't be concerned about them dropping too far down the table in terms of what they've got coming up and whether they're in trouble for relegation or anything like that. But I think the issue for them is sort of a sense of, well, have we progressed? And they haven't really this season. I wouldn't say they have.
And that's the worry, really, Jez, for next season, probably for Guingamp, really, because there's a lot of clubs below them that are struggling, really. But you look at this squad, there's some decent players, but there's some old players in defence especially. There's also maybe a couple of young players that have not quite hit the heights that they may be hoping of. I'm thinking Marcus Coco has never really kicked on from being we've always seen him as a young prospect, but he's almost 22 now, so it's probably time for him to kick on. Marcus Thuram as well came in at the summer, big fanfare, has only scored the 2 goals, hasn't added anything in the middle of the park. You look at Saliba, we've already mentioned. You look at Abdul Kamara, they brought back from Derby. He's not really added anything. Ludovic Blah is very young still, but he's dropping in and out. So the worry isn't just now that some of the players are old, they're not scoring enough goals, but also that the lifeblood of a club like this, that are one of the lowest budgets in Liga, and is that some of these players that they do have in their books, these young players that they have a lot of hope for and promise, and looking at the end of that to sell them on, they're not progressing in the way they hope.
Yeah, I feel like the whole club's in a bit of a strange position. I think they're one of those very likeable clubs that everyone sort of roots for as one of those famous underdogs, a couple of cup wins, and even Rennes, I'm not sure, sort of totally begrudge them their successes. And but they're a bit like, I mean, it's a bad example this year because they're both sort of in big relegation trouble, but I don't know if they're kind of the French version of what teams like Stoke and Southampton have been like for a while in the Premier League, when you kind of think, not what's the point of them, but for years they were like always very safe, mid-table, not worrying about maybe a nice cup run, but otherwise not worrying about relegation, not worrying about Europe. And you sort of think, what's the point? And I don't know if after a while, I don't mean that in an offensive way, but after a while, I don't know if the fans actually get bored of this sort of nothingness year after year after year. And even I wonder if there's even an element of some people within a club sort of thinking, at least if we had a relegation fight, at least that there's something to get excited about. I'm sure, I don't think they want a relegation fight, but I do wonder if there's some kind of, not complacency, but sort of, what do we do now? We've established ourselves as a league and club. Do we stick or twist? Do we sort of, splurge to try to take the next step up? Do we, try a Monaco, Lille, whatever project, which, those two examples show that it really can go either way. And I just feel like they're sort of in search of a bit of an identity at the moment. And I don't know. I did have someone, a Guingamp fan, a while ago, sort of had a bit of a rant about the fact that Kombouaré doesn't trust the younger players enough. I think it sort of goes both ways. I don't think Blas and Coco, to use those as the obvious examples, I don't think they've quite fulfilled the potential that they first looked to be having, especially in the sort of youth French teams. But at the same time, they can't do that if they're not played on a consistent basis. I think Pete made an excellent point about the chopping and changing, which I really don't think helps. Bringing in players like Grenier and Bakoto, they're both very talented players, but that also sort of, I don't know if that does Guingamp down a little bit, sort of thinking, well, we're a club that's going to help players that are a bit lost in the middle of their career. Again, should they be aiming for something more than that? And then, I mean, I don't think it made huge news, but I only sort of noticed it because Metz were involved, and maybe I'm taking a slightly biased view, but when Guingamp and Metz played a few weeks ago, Kombouaré sort of completely lost it with Hans, and was really insulting him. Basically said, "I'll be waiting in the tunnel, to fight you," and sort of alluding to the fact that he was an animal and all this, which seems very un-Kombouaré like. He seems quite generally relatively placid, and the Guingamp president also got involved, and actually Hans is thinking of suing him for slander at the moment. So I don't know. The club should be in a completely nice, level, plateaued place, and I don't know if the fact that they are is somehow giving them cause to have some kind of crisis of identity. Or maybe I'm talking load of rubbish. I don't know. I'm trying to find a reason, because there isn't an obvious reason why it's all fallen off a cliff for them.
I'd agree with that. I think like last season, you could easily pinpoint what the Guingamp identity was, and it was that sort of a counter-attacking, fast-flowing pace with young players that are looking to develop their career, led by Jimmy Briand, the experienced head. And this season, it feels a bit disjointed. It feels like there's been a disconnect. It hasn't felt like they've tried to build on last season at all. It's felt like they've sort of sidestepped, but they've at the same time almost gone backwards a little bit. I think, in terms of the way they've set up and the way they've been playing, it's very difficult to associate, with a set sort of lineup, apart from Briand. And Briand hasn't been, outstanding. And when you are chopping and changing as much as you are, it becomes very difficult for any kind of rhythm, for one thing, but especially in terms of identity, I don't think there's a point there, because how can you foster it? I don't think that you can, and that's definitely been one of their major issues.
It's the very funny thing at the moment, isn't it? It's almost like, I think you hit the nail on the head earlier, Jez, about possibly a previous Stoke, but I'm also thinking for Serie A fans out there that I think a perfect example is a Chievo, maybe, a team that sort of perpetually have been mid-table, never really troubling the upper echelons, never really quite getting in the scrap for relegation consistently, at least anyway, just sort of stuck in a plateau. And when you are in that, and in all honesty, that's Guingamp overachieving, if we're being absolutely honest here, how long can you really sustain that kind of level, though, of sort of middling nothingness? Is it maybe better to be fighting for your lives for maybe a season and then seeing that through, or spending a little bit more, or adding a little bit more ingenuity to it and try and push it for those European places and try something different. It's one of those strange struggles. It will, like you say, it would be nice to hear from fans that have teams like that where they feel like a middle. Maybe a perfect English example might be an Ipswich. Really, at the moment, that's a team that is a perpetual 12th place in the Championship, isn't it? That it's sort of never really going to go anywhere and won't spend the money to try and push further forward and won't quite sink enough to trouble the bottom places, but at the same time, when you are a team like that, eventually, like Stoke, it tends to get you in the end. It tends to be a point where it sort of stagnates a little bit too much and you do sink into another relegation battle. But that's what I fear about Guingamp next season if they don't pull their finger out a little bit. On to league leaders, really, now, who return to league on form, really, as they beat Metz 5-0. But what happens now after that Champions League defeat is the interesting one, because they've got a whole season left still. There's another third of a season left, Peter. Really, there's possibly two cup finals, one semi-final yet to come, obviously first, and the cup final in a couple of weeks. But they've got an entire Ligue 1 schedule still left to go, really. What did they try and do in these last sections? Was Saturday an example of them trying to do something new with playing players like Christian Nkunku and playing him for the entire match and bringing on Timothy Weah earlier and having different options on the bench? Is it time to experiment with this team for the rest of the season?
It's quite strange, isn't it? This idea that, clubs going for free pieces of silverware, but they may be on the point of an existential crisis that leaves them looking, what's the meaning of this anymore? And it's all very weird, but there is a lot to play for, and I think part of that will be giving other players opportunities. I think Emery will want to do that. I think he has tried to force it as much as he can at times within the constraints that he's had on him. But I think fundamentally they're helped by the World Cup this year. If they want, in terms of maintaining performance standards, there are a lot of players in that squad who'll be playing for places to go to Russia. And I think that that should keep their standards high. They will be motivated by the silverware, of course, and rightly they should be. You can win as many times as you want, but that's what you play for. It's those opportunities. And the Ligue 1 title's not wrapped up yet. Obviously, the Coupe de Ligue final is next week, I think. Is it next week or week after next?
It's the week after next.
31st.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So they're all opportunities on the horizon, and that does give Emery a chance to experiment to an extent. But then again, you have the fact that there's going to be serious change in the summer, so there's also that side to consider. And I think for now it's a case of wrapping up this season the best way they can, giving opportunities to the likes of Nkunku, who was excellent, really, really good on the left-hand side for PSG against Metz. I was going to say something horrible about Metz then, but I'll leave that.
Go ahead.
No, I'll be nice. You're going down anyway, so
exactly.
But yeah, no. So there is opportunity for that kind of experimentation, and I guess it's one of those when you see games like this, and obviously PSG ran out 5-0 winners, but they could have scored so many more, and I think that's kind of, well, I'm going off on a slight tangent here when just thinking about the issues that they've got, but I'm sure we'll talk about that in a minute. But the idea that when you have players like Mbappe, for example, who could have scored about 4, and they're missing so many opportunities, and there's no sense of punishment for that, and they're going to win the league title anyway as well, and it's just that sort of sense that when you're trying to aspire to such high levels, you can see where that argument comes from at times, and I think that was slightly evident against Metz on Saturday afternoon. But that said, there is a lot to play for them this season, and they will want to make sure that they end the season on a high, and Emery especially will want to make sure that his CV is as polished as possible.
Because that's the interesting thing now, really, Jez, is that kind of what can they do for the rest of the season, trying different stuff. And one thing they can do, like I mentioned, is try and play some of these younger players, give them a chance, maybe even pop them in the shop window to help with that FFP in the summer. That'll probably rear its ugly head as well. And one player in that is Christopher Nkunku, who's come through the ranks there at Paris Saint-Germain. He's still a young player, and in that one, could have had 4 goals, really. He had 1 chalked off. He had 2 nice little goals. He hit the post. He showed that he has some ability, and some might argue against a Met side, but he's not necessarily going to be someone that's going to be starting fairly regularly for Paris Saint-Germain, but for someone else, maybe in Europe or else in France, he could be someone that teams have a look at.
Yeah, I feel I should just quickly say that Metz hit the bar and probably should have scored, and it was just 1-0. But yeah, just to stick up with them a little bit. But I mean, I feel like it's weird to say about a match that finished 5-0, but I just thought everything about that match was who cares? Couldn't care less either way. Metz are down. PSG have got pretty much one possibly difficult match left this season, which is the Coupe de la Ligue final against Monaco. You know, they will win the league. Assuming they beat Caen, they'll play either Chambly or Les Herbiers in the Coupe de France final. And yeah, it is more silverware, but you know, okay, that they'll win back the title, which is important, and 2 cups are nice, but I don't think many in the squad probably care that much about those 2. The fact is, it's, you know, not even halfway through March, and the season's pretty much over for them. And yeah, I think that the only thing that can make the rest of the season interesting for them is to play around a little bit with the team, give some youngsters like Nkunku more of a chance, maybe, you know, possibly give Lo Celso the keys to the number 10 position, or you know, to the more attacking role, and see what he can do there, rather than having to be on defensive duty as well. But I still feel like the team selection is probably something that gets sorted out higher up than Emery, and I think that's the problem. It's nice that they're giving Nkunku a go, but there's lots more like him waiting in the wings, and he's been waiting in the wings long enough. And yeah, he was excellent, and you know, it was really good to see him take his chance. I fear that these are the only chances they'll get. You know, a few of these players have performed well in the past in pre-season, and then as soon as the season started, they've vanished from team lineups. I feel like this is a sort of post-season for PSG in a way, and I'm not hopeful that, unless you know, someone does something truly spectacular, like Nkunku carries on scoring a couple of goals a game for the rest of the season, and you know, really cements his place in the squad for next season, great. But I'm not hopeful that even if they get a few run-outs here, that much is going to happen with them next year. I think, you know, to the extent that they can, and in the summer, I'm sure they will sell 2 or 3 players for a decent amount of money, and then presumably try to buy a few stars to replace them. And I still think players like Nkunku will be bit part squad players at best, but possibly should be looking to move on if they really want to cement themselves as first team regulars somewhere, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely, but this is a great chance for them to hopefully put themselves in the shop window and convince a team that they're good enough to play for Paris Saint-Germain and good enough to play for someone else more regularly and as a consistent starter. That's I think the hope for a lot of these players. You think maybe Timothy Weah, in the sense that he's probably a lot younger. He
and a bigger name.
Yeah, definitely a bigger name. But we'll probably stay another year or so. But someone like Nkunku that is sort of he's in his 20s now. He's got to decide on his future. He needs to play more regular football if he wants to advance, and whether that be a loan spell or a move permanently away in the summer, that has to be on the back, in the forefront really of his mind. And performances like that one against Metz, if he can keep that going in future games with Neymar currently out, and they don't mind rotating things with Di Maria and others, then take advantage of the chances that you get, and hopefully someone might come through to him. But I wanted to quickly discuss as well on this one, Peter. It looks like Emery's out the door. We're relatively certain on that. But let's start speculating on who should really be coming in. Out of all the managers out there, who would you like to be PSG manager next season?
It's a difficult one. I think the one you'd like, the one you'd, I guess from an English football perspective, you wouldn't want Pochettino to leave Tottenham, but I think he'd be a very, very good choice. That said, For me, I think Allegri from Juventus would be a really good appointment for PSG. I think what he's done with Juventus and how he's converted them in, well, not converted, but carried on the baton of keeping them as a successful side, not only domestically, but in Europe especially, showing that he can win games over two tie. I think that the Tottenham tie was a prime example of that, especially in the second leg. The tactical nuance to switch things around, to take the game when it hasn't seemed like they've been on top. I think that's what they've lacked, PSG. I've said all along with managers, especially at a club like PSG, it's that they need an ego. They need someone big enough to force them into shape. And I think Allegri would be a good choice tactically, but then you look at the way the club's set up, and you've got the players that are, they're prized more than the team itself, and it's all about names. Even Timothy Weah making his debut is just a name, isn't it? So it's you want someone to come in and smash them heads together. I don't think Enrique could do that. I mean, he has managed Barcelona, so that does weigh in his favour. Managing a club which Messi clearly does have a lot of sway in, and getting the best out of them is no mean feat. I don't think someone like Wenger could do it. I think Conte wouldn't suit them necessarily. I think in terms of attacking perspective, and Diego Simeone as well, I don't know how Neymar would want, and whether Neymar would wish to appoint him. So I think Allegri would be a smart choice. Then again, it's that question of egos, and I think the way the club is set up at the moment, you can put a manager in there, but they're just going to get the same results unless you get fundamental reform about the way they're approaching things, where they're approaching the transfer market, where they're approaching in terms of managers' influence. I mean, we mentioned it before, but I don't think Emery had much say in the transfer market. I mean, Jez said about team selection as well. I mean, how can that be conducive to success? And obviously, it's dependent on FFP as well. You're looking at whether they've got a bottomless pit anymore. But yeah, going back to who I think would be a good point, I think Allegri would be a different choice from the names that are battered about at the moment. Whether he'd want to go there is a different story, but yeah, that's who I'd say.
It's certainly an interesting one, especially if Allegri wins the Serie A this season. He might think that's really the biggest accomplishment he can do at Juve. If he can't manage another Champions League, maybe that cycle of that squad sort of runs out at that point, and maybe it is a time for him to move on. Jez, what do you think? There's a lot of names that Peter's already mentioned: Pochettino, Conte. I'll throw the likes of Tuchel and Wenger, maybe even Diego Simeone might be a kind of manager they maybe target as well. What do you think would be the best fit for them?
I like the sound of Allegri. I hadn't thought of that. I think that's a really good call. I mean, the ones that I was going to suggest were Pochettino and also Conte. If he doesn't want the Italy job, I do think this year he sort of sleptwalked through the season at Chelsea, but I think what he did last year was fantastic with them. What he did with a relatively average Italy team was great, and he obviously did very well at Juventus as well. So I think he's got the caliber, and Pochettino has done wonders, I think, at Tottenham, and obviously has got the PSG connection. So I think that would be a popular choice. But for all the reasons that Peter said, I don't think any top manager should want to go near that job. I really don't. I think it's a very thankless job at the moment. I mean, obviously, if they win the Champions League, great. They'll be sort of, given the freedom of the city of Paris for life or whatever. But I can't see how they're going to do that at the moment with the way the club is run. And for all Emery's faults, and I do think he had a lot of them, and I do think he was weak with the players, I do think that the major problems of the club are above him. I think there's a very rich sport kid who is a very, very average tennis player, doesn't really have any kind of football background, and thinks he can run a football club just by throwing money at it. But I think that the signings he's made, great. Neymar, Mbappe is going to get a hell of a lot of sort of headlines and lines in the press, and it's going to get you a lot of shirt sales. but no team has ever won anything without a decent defence and a decent defensive midfielder. That's always been their problem. They've ignored it for years, and any decent manager, I think, will see that. And unless they're given absolute guarantees that they're going to be allowed to sign who they want in those positions and then play who they want match after match, they're not going to want to go there. And I'm not convinced that they're going to be given those guarantees.
That's the real worry, isn't it? It's a tough situation that they're in a sense of who they want to bring in and who they can attract. They would want someone long term in mind, at least, like a Pochettino, but whether it might be a shorter term idea, maybe Luis Enrique is another man who's had his name in the hat, maybe someone like that as well. It's a little bit difficult to tell. Time for the plane to Russia now, and we've got one interesting player, and we've not got a lot of time to do it in, so we're just going to make 1 point on each of them. Try and make it as quick as you can, gentlemen. And I'll start with our player, at least anyway, and it's Marseille's Dimitri Payet, who's had an up and down season, but was the real catalyst in Euro 2016 for the French squad. Peter, do you think he's the kind of player that they'll need again with his experience and with his ability to change games?
It's a blessing in disguise. You've given me just a short amount of time, I think. So in pro Dimitri Payet corner, I think one thing that Payet does offer is creativity, and that's something that Deschamps has valued with him. And I think we have seen that despite his up and down form. I mean, he's up there, and I think he's third most assists in Ligue 1 this season. He's up there with the most key passes of any player. Of course, his form has been detrimental, and I do think not detrimental. It's been poor, and I think that relatively compared to the likes of Thauvin and Fekir, you would probably favour those two, and absolutely rightly so. But for what Payet has to offer is, his experience. He's done it on the international stage. I mean, he tore up Euro 2016, and I think that big game, big tournament pedigree certainly stands him in good stead.
Jez, do you think he deserves a spot against a lot of these young, exciting attacking players that France have?
No. I think that even this Euro 2016, I think he tore up the first two matches and did okay against Iceland, but I thought he did a bit of a Benzema and sort of vanished a little bit after the group stages. But since then, I think he's been, for the most part of 2 seasons now, extremely average. Rich made what I thought was a great joke the other day, wondering after Thauvin saved them in can't remember who they drew against last week, but whoever it was when he scored in the last minute, Nantes. Rich said, "Does OM stand for one man?" Which I thought was very harsh, because I think Luis Gustavo is having a good season as well. But Payet, in my opinion, certainly isn't. And there's flashes like, good goal against Bilbao, but I don't think he's done it anywhere near consistently enough to warrant a place, considering that there's so many other talented players who could fill the same positions. Lemar, I think, is just as talented. He can also play on the left or in the centre. He can also be on set piece duty, and Lemar actually bothers to help with the defence. I think one of France's big Achilles heels in the summer could be the fact that the wide players don't do enough to track back. I think it's been a problem with Mbappe in some of the matches he's played for France, but I'll forgive him because he's still sort of young and exuberant. Payet it's always been an issue with him. Obviously, when you've got Evra playing behind you, that makes the job a lot harder, but it's still a job he's meant to do, and he's never done it. In the past, when he's been playing very well going forward, you could sort of balance it out and say, well, the lack of defensive help he gives is sort of hidden by the fact that he gives us so much going forwards. But I don't think he's reached those heights for quite a while now. And in the meantime, a lot of very young, very talented young players have come onto the scene and I think overtaken him. And the only reason I'd have him in the squad is just for the experience of having played in a big tournament, which possibly not many of the more forward players that Deschamps chooses will have had. But I don't think that's enough in itself to have him on the plane.
It's a tough one, isn't it? And let's get a very quick final verdict on this. Peter, is he on your plane?
Absolutely not.
Jez?
definitely. No, definitely not.
What a difference 2 years can make. I think it's almost a guarantee that Dimitri Payet will be one of those players that misses out. He might have a better chance just because you think Deschamps might give in again. Also, you think that Kingsley Coman has picked up an injury as well. There's still maybe a spot in there. Tovan's injured now. Whether how long that sees him out for, and whether that's niggling towards the World Cup as well. Maybe might sneak his name under the lights, but I don't think it's a realistic prospect with the other players that are at play. That's all that we have time for this week. My thanks to Peter, Jeremy, and all of you listening at home. Join us for the preview show on Thursday, and the main show will be back at the same time, same place next week. A bientôt, and goodbye.